Hey, hello everyone and welcome to Extreme Graphics Tech. My name is Angelo and on today's video I'm going to be talking about smooth motion. And the reason I'm bringing this topic to the channel is because many people have asked about this, not here in this English channel but in my Spanish channel, and I thought it will be interesting to make a video about this here too. So what smooth motion essentially is the answer to AFMF from AMD, which is a technology that you can activate on a driver's level to basically create 2x frames using like frame generation. But instead of being frames like generated, I will say they are more optically created, like optical flow or something like that. The reason I say this is because frame generation uses input data from the game, like motion vectors and so on, while this normally works with the final image, blending two images together or morphing them as lossless scaling works. We have shown here in the channel many different types. Okay, so Nvidia, the reason I didn't want to make this video for my Spanish channel initially because I thought this technology is completely useless, I have to say. And you are going to see my reasonings behind this at the end when we go to the conclusions. Okay, but so to avoid any issues, let me explain to you a couple of things. The first thing, I try to record the videos at 120 FPS, which of course YouTube cannot show, but I will try to show you how it works in there. And the reason also is, well, by recording more frames, we will have more data which are used to compare. The other way is how the technology works. You have to activate it on the new Nvidia app on a game-by-game basis. So you go to the game you want to activate and you activate the split motion and you start. But I have to tell you that it's not going to work on many games. For some reason, it happened to be maybe it's a it's a me thing, I don't know, but on some games I activate the option and when I want to start the game will simply crash. So it's not going to work for every game. Also, don't try, as many people have tried, to activate the smooth motion plus frame generation at the same time because it will create issues. Either the game will crash or the game will look completely wrong. So be careful with that because that's not the point of this technology. So once you have activated there, then you start the game and technically the game is already running it. And in a way, an interesting thing and a difference that it has between the AMD technology is that when you are using AFMF, if you use something like MSI Afterburner, it won't record those extra frames because I think the frame is created in the pipeline after at some point in the driver or in the point of the pipeline frame generation that the MSI Afterburner thinks the frame is done. Okay, so you have to use AMD own measure tool, okay, in order to be able to see. While on Nvidia is interesting because MSI Afterburner can record how many frames are created, which means that it's created in a different part of the pipeline of the image, okay, but it's after the game has created the test. Because when you activate DLSS Frame Generation and you do some benchmark with some things that have it, you have the whole frame, including the generated ones. But on one of the tests that we're going to be showing, you're going to see that the frame, okay, remain half during by the end of the benchmark. The game registered only half of the frame, while we see on MSI Afterburner that we were doubling it. Another thing to have into consideration is the fact that these are not free frames because they will cost you some frames. So for example, if you're running something at 80 frames per second, when you activate a smooth motion, you're not going to get 160 because the base frame will probably be lower by 10 frames to around 70, which means you're going to get around 140 frames, okay? So it's important to understand that this is not free frames and it probably will affect more or less depending on the GPU you have. So having said all this, please, let's see some of the benchmarks that I have done. So the problem is how, in what case you will actually use a smooth motion having an RTX 4000 or 5000 series. In my case, I think like the only sort of thing I have thought about is maybe something like Elden Ring, which is limited to 60 FPS. And then maybe you want to play at 120 FPS. That's like the only case that I see this may be useful, which I don't know if I'm ever going to use it even then. because I don't know. I think those games are very time sensitive. You know, it's like one of the example that Jacob, one of the evangelists, said. It's like using it on Mortal Kombat 1, which is limited to 60 FPS. But the reason they are limited is specifically because that's how the game is supposed to run for frame time issues and frame counting for people who take the game seriously, and how fighting games are very sensitive to when you input things and all of that. So I don't know how this added latency is actually going to help on a fighting game that is so input sensitive, right? So why would you add more latency to a game that is very input sensitive? And there is a reason why it's locked to 60 FPS, so the animation and everything is completely in sync. So I don't know, that may be a use case scenario for some, but I wouldn't use it. So I'm not quite sure. I don't think this technology is useful, and I think Nvidia also doesn't really see this as a great or a very useful thing, because they didn't do any sort of publicity before launching this or saying anything, and it wasn't like a selling point. At least frame generation was, it's selling you 4 times more power and whatever, but it's one of those cases where I'm not sure where you will be using this. So in my case, this is a Fluid Motion. I hope, well, you got something out of this, but from my point of view, if this is not added to 2000 or 3000 series, to me it's a useless technology. Some people have said to me that maybe they use for like emulators, but for that to work, it needs to be the program needs to be accepted by the Nvidia app. I don't know if that's the case, but even so, I don't know. Does anybody really want to play like a 60 FPS PlayStation 3 games at 120? Is that something that you care about? Because as I said, going from 30 to 60, from my point of view, makes absolutely no sense with something like this. But the technology is there. If you have the GPU, or you are going to have one of these 5000 or 4000 series and you want to use it, it's up to you. You can test it and see how it goes, but I don't see any point to here. Thank you so much, and as always, see you on the next video. Okay, so here I'm testing AFMF on the Dying Light 2 game. And as you can see here in this area, you can see how it's getting extremely ghosty and fuzzy, right? We can see here, this is okay, no issues or no. I try to do like fast movement. So here you can see how sort of these things work. It's also using some kind of morphing technology here. You see, on fast movement it's not this is like morphing. It's not like generating an actual frame in the middle like some other technologies, like they sort of put. It's like more a morph sort of technology. You can see here we play this at a very slow pace, right? So we can see how this thing works. Even at 0.25 is sort of difficult, but you see, so in some moments it doesn't look that bad when we move like this. You can see here, if we move one by one, okay, it's hard because there is all this morphing happening and things, and the movement is so quick that I don't think anybody will really be able to see, and it doesn't look that bad in some cases. But yeah, I'm not sure if this is something that I will be using, but okay, let's a normal speed actually could look quite decent. Okay, you cannot detect anything. I don't know if it's a little bit more blurry than normal, but yeah, so probably the biggest problem I see is exactly this. Is this. So now what I'm doing is I'm going to activate upscale, and the reason for that is to try to generate more frames as input to see if anything improves in terms of here. So if we go back, I don't know why it went back, but here when you see we have more frames, just to try to give it a better chance for the ghosting to disappear, but it doesn't. It doesn't disappear in those little areas where they are. So at the moment we are technically internally at around 50 FPS with the RTX 5090, everything 4K and so on, with everything active, and you can see there is still some ghosting. It's okay. I wouldn't say it's horrible, but why use this instead of using actual DLSS frame generation? I don't think I will. So that's my main read with this technology, is why wouldn't I use this? And if I try to activate frame generation, yeah, it's going to crash, it's going to stop out. It's going to see that little effect you saw there, that color, it is what happens. If we go to the end of this, you see this sort of weird color imaging is what happens when you try to activate both of them at the same time. It's really weird and it doesn't work correctly, and then it crashes your game. Okay, so here, just to have an exact comparison, I'm using the Horizon Zero Dawn benchmark just to test exactly what is happening, or to try to see what's going on. I have the speed, and you can see one is going at 95 FPS and the other one is going at 149. So the right side, as you can see, is the one with motion smooth on. Okay, now the funny part about this is that you can see that views are being used a lot, but you're not getting double the frame rate here, okay? But when we move, well, this is going to be a difficult one because this is running internally at 120 FPS, and the reason for that was for me to try to record as many frames as possible. But if you pay attention to this, you can see that there is some more like motion blur in it than there is in the other one. They look quite smooth when you're looking them normally. Look at this, they, it's decent, I'll say, but there are areas where we can see and it looks more ghosty. You see there's less detail in this because obviously this is not like a real technique. But when we look at them like side by side and you're just playing, it honestly doesn't look bad in certain instances. It looks quite good and quite decent. I have to give the game that. However, if we go to certain areas, you can see that it does smear a little bit of the detail. So the question is, would you prefer that sort of illusion of smoothness for an image that is a little bit more blurry in movement? And there are other areas of this where it's more easily visible. When we go through, you see the characters are having, because of course it's not just the frame changing, it's also the character moving. So you can see there is clear ghosts around the characters which you don't have in the real one. Okay, so in terms of performance, you can see we are getting more performance, or more smoothness, to just call it away, but we are also getting an image that is all the time more blurry from my point of view. Now, an interesting thing about this, if we move, well, you can see here clearly as day the problem, right? We can move step by step now. See? It's clearly a lot. It's like you have motion blur active in some areas. So that's why I don't think, honestly, this is something most people will want to use, and that's why I think frame generation, they're gonna different. Of course, when everything is moving, it seems okay. So there could be a case scenario where you would prefer to have that extra smoothness, but look at how much detail we're losing. And from my point of view, it's not worth it, but anyone can test use it any way they want. Anyway, what I wanted to show you, what I find interesting, is here. You see, so this is telling us that we were at an average of 72 FPS, even though MSI Afterburner was always telling us that we were higher than that. And the reason is because the time that it creates the frame is quite different from other techniques like AFMF. So the game internally is rendering 72, and as frame generation is not part of the equation for the game. So the game is not counting those frames that are created after. So as you see, this is the spatial technique, evidently, but you also are losing quite some performance. You can see here that the average FPS on the first one is 87 and this one is 72, while the 1% low and the percentile are not that bad, I would say, difference, but still there is something there. So there is a lot of things to take into consideration when activating this technology and in what cases it works. And from my point of view, it doesn't work on every single case, and that's why I still don't find a real use case for something like this. And another game I was trying, okay, let me change this again to keep it on the same side, is again on Starfield. So as you can see here, we have 117, and here we are almost doubling, but of course it's not the same because there is no benchmark. So I'm just running around like a crazy chicken, just trying to find out. And as you can see here, the game works so much better in terms of quality and resolution. You see, it's hard. I can't find, you see, it's not as easy to spot like a blurry frame. There are some, but it's much less. What you can see, however, is sort of the warping happening. Look, here is completely straight, and then the next frame is a little bit warped. You see? Then if we move a little bit more, okay, it's now sort of straight, now straight, straight. Okay, yeah, I think at this point it's not going to work anymore. But that's the thing, you can see how the image is being worked, but it looks sort of decent. So as I said, it may have its uses, but this game also supports DLSS Frame Generation. So why would I use a smooth motion instead of DLSS Frame Generation in any case? For a game like this, probably you can see some of when we move about 25% of the speed of the original, it is even under scrutiny. It looks quite decent, and I think it will depend a lot on the sort of and type of game. But you can see some of the wobbling that is happening while moving around. So yeah, it's not perfect. Of course, it's never going to be. You can see here how around some characters and so on. So this needs a very high base of frame in order for it to see the effect as often or as clear as you will otherwise. But as you can see here, so there are some case scenarios where maybe you can find this useful, depending on sort of the game you want to play. I don't know if I have found that game, but well, there you go. This is a smooth motion for you. Okay, so as you saw, I have to say, initially I wasn't expecting much. And I have to say that when I started some of the game like Starfield to test it looked really, really good. I didn't catch any artifact or any issues, at least not at first glance. There may be some in some areas, but not where I was testing. So it looked quite good, and I was like really surprised. And on the sense of how the game felt, it did felt more smooth, just not as smooth. I mean, if I lower the frame rate or activate the frame rate, real frame generation, the feeling is different, not just in latency, but also the perceived smoothness of the game is quite different. I don't know how to explain it, but I don't feel this creates the same sort of sensation. It does feel better in terms of smoothness, but it doesn't feel as good as frame generation or as obviously having more frames. And this is not just due to latency, which this has a little bit, but it's not that big of a deal. It's just, I don't know how to explain it, but the sensations are different. And still, I think it's quite good. However, as you saw on Dying Light 2, for example, there are some issues with it, for example, on the foliage. Some of the things, they look like ghosts and so on. There was a lot of ghosting in them, and so it's kind of weird. But in general, I would say, depending on the situation, this can be a good technology. But the problem for me, and the reason I feel this technology is completely useless, is to begin with that this technology is only available at the moment for the RTX 5000, which is only RTX 5090 and 5080. And I would never activate something like this if I don't have enough frames with these two GPUs. It's not like a smooth motion is the thing I'm going to be using. The reason for this is because probably any game that I want to play that is for the last, up until 2020, 2022, or even 2023 are going to probably run very, very fast on these GPUs, right? So there is no point for me on activating smooth motion. Then, in games like in newer games, they are going to probably have some sort of implementation of DLSS Frame Generation. So there is still no point to activate the smooth motion, because now I can override that and use 2x, 3x, or 4x DLSS Frame Generation. So far, I don't think there is any reason for me to activate this. But even then, Nvidia is saying that it's going to activate this on the RTX 4000 series, which, okay, you say, but that series also support frame generation. So once again, why will I use a smooth motion instead of frame generation? Because probably the games that need a smooth motion are games that are, of some sort of level, and they would probably have some sort of DLSS frame generation integrated into them. Because any old game are probably going to run very well even with a 4060. So if this technology was included for RTX 2000 and 3000 series, I hope they do, I don't know, they haven't said anything, they only named a 4000, then I can see this being something to help many of these cards in many situations where they cannot activate the DLSS frame generation. But right now, I don't feel there is any help for it, because there are many old games that are limited. Some Need for Speed games on PC were locked at 30 FPS. okay, which is not ideal, but there are ways to unlock them to run at 60, but some of them break the physics of the game. But let's say you want to use a smooth motion there. So 30 FPS is not enough for a smooth motion to work correctly. So you are not going to really be going from 30 to 60 in terms of latency, or even if the smoothness is not going to feel as good. So that's a big issue right there.